Dr. Christie Solomon, and this is Christian Concepts. We're so happy that you tuned in again to watch us and to go with us as we study some of the concepts, some of the doctrines, some of the teachings of the Christian religion, the number one religion in this globe, in this world. Yeah. We are glad to start our study today, and we're going to do something a little different today. We're going to have three different segments, and I need for you to get your Bible. I need for you to get your concordance and whatever other tools you use as you go through this study today about the book of Genesis. So we're going to cover at least three areas in the book of Genesis, and we will be able to discuss some things that you may not have covered in your last session with your church audience or even in your own personal study, but we want you to go further now that you have some time. Again, we'll be right back. This is Dr. Christie and Christian Concepts. Don't you go away. Hi, I'm Dr. Christie Solomon, and this is Christian Concepts Devotion. Today we're going to be studying from the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. And we want you to get yourself ready because there's several aspects in this 50-chapter book that you may not have considered. So, our first section is going to be covering the vital statistics of Genesis. Our second segment is going to cover the major themes that are shared in this book. And our third segment is going to cover the storyline of seven major characters covered in the book of Genesis. Again, the key number is 7. There are going to be 7 vital statistics that I need for you to consider as you go through the book of Genesis. There are going to be 7 important storylines of 7 characters in the book of Genesis as well. And our third segment is going to cover 7 themes that is included in this book of Genesis. Are you ready? I'm ready, so let's get started. First, what I want us to do is understand the book of Genesis and what it may have for you in your spiritual growth and in your practical application of life. Let me just put my glasses on and let's get started reading. The vital statistics in Genesis in these 50 chapters. 50 chapters covers a wealth of information. One, you need to understand that this book, the main purpose of this book is to tell you, share with you, introduce to you that Genesis was written to let the Israelite people, the community of the Jewish nation at that time, and of course invariably for us today as Christians, to know how this world was created, why this world was created, and for whom. God created this world, and he determined when his creation, as he made everything in those 7 days, that everything was good. And part of the creation is me, my brother and sister, you as well. All nations, all people, we believe, we take the position that the Bible has, that God created everything, including nature, including the water, the sky, the elements. And from that understanding, from that major position, God created everything, including people, and the people he created, he determined to set them aside from the other nations that would be evolving, that would be growing, that would be repopulating themselves. He wanted a specific nation to be the focal group of people where he was going to introduce himself as the one and only true God. That premise, my brother and sister, is what separates Christianity from all other religions. One, that God is a sovereign God and that there is no other God before him. That's the purpose of this book, Genesis. to let us know from the very beginning. And I'm sure that you understand in your study, Genesis is a word that means beginnings or origins or starting. So the book of Genesis in its 50 chapters covers the beginning of man, Adam, his birth into the world until Joseph enters the scene and dies. Chapter 1 through chapter 50 is introducing to you the beginnings of several aspects of life, of nature, of our purpose. And the purpose that God has intended was for the people at that time. They weren't even the Israelite nation. But those people from their heritage, from Adam, down to Noah, down to Abraham, down to Moses, and then on to Jesus Christ, were set apart so that the rest of the entire world would know that God is the supreme God, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipotent and omnipresent. So he wanted us to have a record of the creation and why these Israelite people has impacted the world and, of course, the Christian religion. Do you accept that? Now that we know that this Bible, just specifically the Bible, but specifically the book of Genesis was written to let us know about the creation. See, we're not debating science. We're only debating any theory, any premise that does not include the Creator God. And there's a whole lot of those philosophies, those theories floating around. So for Christianity and for the Hebrew nation, the Jewish people, the Jewish religion, Judaism, we accept the premise without explanation, but just as is given, starting point, God created the earth, the world, even the stars and the planets. And he separated a group of people at that point in time is the nation of Israel and asked them to worship him and him only. The second vital point that I need for you to understand is the author. The author here is credited to be Moses. Moses, of course, you may remember, and one of the major characters is responsible for taking the people who were captive in Egypt at that time out of Egypt and preparing them to go into the land of promise called Israel or Canaan at that time for the people of Israel. So the purpose is to tell us about creation, to introduce us to him as the sovereign God through the people of Israel, and to understand we are worshipers even today, and then to understand the author is Moses. Also in these vital statistics, we need to know that this book of Genesis was written to specifically for the people of Israel for their own connection, for their own history, for their own understanding how every generation related to the next, leading up to the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Fourthly, we need to understand that this book of Genesis was written during the setting of what we now call the Middle East. And that includes Israel, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, all of those areas over there. That's when chapter 1 through 50 of Genesis was written. Did you know that? That's why that area is still important today. That's why the political climate and the religious climate is still important today. Number 6, the key verses in this Genesis book includes a couple, but may I read the first one in chapter 1, verse 27. And it reads as follows. It says, so God created man in his own image. And you do know that that is not a physical image, because God is not a physical being. He is a spirit and he is truth. So the image that God is sharing with man, which is us, how we're made, is the positive characteristics, truth, ethics, integrity, love, joy, peace, compassion. All of those are characteristics of God, and since man is made in the image of God, that's the characteristics we're supposed to demonstrate amongst our daily walk within our context and with people. Let me read that again. chapter 1, verse 27 says, "So God created in his own image, in the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them." That's verse chapter 1, verse 27. I want you to understand that's one of the important key verses here. And a second key verse, one of these vital statistics that I want you to think about, is from chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. And I want to read that to you as well. And it reads as follows: "I will make you a great nation." He's talking to the nation of Israel at that time. "And I will bless you." Those are his promises. "I will make your name great." And we know today that Israel's name is known throughout the world. "And you will be a blessing." Absolutely, they have been. "I will bless those who bless you." Do you hear that, my people? The Bible says here, "I will bless you. I will bless those who bless you. And whoever curses you, I will curse." That's why Israel still stands today. God still has his protection around that group of people. And here's for us: "And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." That's our New Testament connection with Jesus Christ, who was born a Hebrew person, a person of Jewish descent. And we, of course, are blessed because of him. We are grafted, adopted into this family. We weren't the original people who God spoke to, but thank God we have we have an inheritance. We are now part of this family of God through the nation of Israel because we are now also Christians. And lastly, the seven important essential vital statistic shared in the book of Genesis are the key people. And the key people mentioned here, of course, are Noah and his wife Eve, goes down to his children, Cain and Abel, and continues on to Noah and his children. It continues down to the people who lived during the beginning, before the flood and after the flood. And then we find that Abraham comes on the scene. Then we learn about Moses, Abraham, and then Moses. Then we find the other characters that I mentioned here are the children of Abraham, which includes Isaac, his wife, and then one of the great-grandsons, Joseph. And as I said to you before, this book, Genesis, covers the beginning of creation, including the first man, Adam, and then the death of Joseph through the 50 chapters covering their story. I hope that these vital statistics have been important to you so that you can take them and apply them practically in your daily living, and then grow spiritually as you realize that you are created to be one of those people who love and worship God. What I want us to do is, while we take a break, I want you to consider how this is impacting you and what you are going to be asking God from this point forward about Genesis and the beginnings of things and how it applies to you. We're going to take a short break. Don't you leave. Come right back. Hi, I'm Dr. Christie Solomon, and this is Christian Concepts Devotion. We are studying the book of Genesis, and I want you to prepare yourself to learn about 7 important characters in the 50 books of Genesis. We do know that Genesis was written for the people of Israel as they were learning about their God, the Creator, who created them in the beginning, as it says in verse 1. And we continue to learn that they were created to worship, which leads us into our purpose, our position with Christ. We are created to worship the one and true God. And so chapter 1 through 50 of Genesis is covering 7 key characters. Their storyline covers several aspects of their experience. And I want you to take good notes. I do want you to continue to watch us and email us or send us a line or two about our study. But while we're here today, let's continue to know who are we talking about in this 50 chapters of Genesis. Well, I share with you on another segment that there are 7 key people that you need to pay attention to in this study. And the first one is, we first start off with the creation story. The story of creation assumes that God is true and that he is the creator. We've also said once before that we don't debate any scientist, we don't debate the evolution story. That is not part of our Christian understanding. What we do emphasize is that we celebrate, we believe, we promote that the creation story begins and ends with the creator, and that is our God. So any other philosophy, any other theology, any other teachings that does not include the creator, God himself, is one that we don't embrace. So in studying Genesis, we find that the creation story starts at chapter 1 and it continues to chapter 2, verse 3. And the creation story, of course, includes the universe, the sky, the heavens, the sun, the moon, the animals, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, and humankind, man and woman, male and female. That's covered in the story of creation. The second story starts with the understanding in the storyline of Adam, the first man. And Adam's story and his family and his children start in chapter 2, verse 4, and it continues over to chapter 5, verse 32. And here we find out that Adam and Eve, of course, was created by God. They were created initially without sin, and then, of course, they disobeyed one of the commands of God and had to endure the consequences. And the consequences was that man would be separated from God in the state that we entered in, which was the sinful state, and that we had to be removed from the garden, which was, of course, peaceful and tranquil, to live a life with labor and effort and by the sweat of the brow. What we do have to emphasize in this story of Adam is, even though we find that there was another major sin of killing of siblings, that God in his infinite mercy ushers in forgiveness in this chapter, in these chapters, the storyline of Adam. So Adam is important because he's the first man. We travel and follow his storyline, which leads us to today, and see similarities and a continuation of life. But we also must credit that God has still forgiven man. He's forgiven woman because of his immense love. But we read about Adam and the repopulation of earth and the Noah story. We find that coming up, that this covers chapter 2, verse 4 to chapter 5, verse 32. So we read about Adam, we read about Eve, we read about Cain, we read about Abel and his descendants. The third storyline that we read about is the story of Noah. Some of you may know that story and understand that Noah was given major instructions by God to build an ark. There was no such thing as an ark before Noah came on the scene. There had not even been rain, because remember, God had taken care of all of that in his infinite plan in the beginning. So in this storyline, we read about Noah and what happens as God has determined to give a flood for 40 days. And in this flood, all humankind, all animals were destroyed. That's why he asked Noah to bring animals back on the ark to repopulate it. He had this plan. That's in this storyline of Noah, and that covers chapter 6, verse 1, all the way to chapter 11. The fourth storyline is the storyline of Abraham. Abraham, you also know, he's one of the major characters in this book, and he continues to share with us his storyline, his experiences with his nephew Lot, his promises to Abraham to have a child in an elderly age with he and his wife Sarah, and other story experiences that's found in chapter 12 all the way through chapter 25. The fifth storyline that we're reading about is the story of Isaac. And Isaac is one of the sons of Abraham. And his storyline covers and begins at chapter 25 all the way through chapter 28 of the ninth verse. Chapter 25, verse 19, all the way through chapter 28, verse 9. The storyline of the sixth storyline, let me say this again. The sixth storyline includes the story of Jacob. And Jacob, we find, is the beginning of where we learn about the 12 tribes, as his sons start this lineage that is included in the history of the nation of Israel. And that starts in chapter 28, beginning at verse 10, and it covers all the way down to chapter 36, verse 43. And he talks about his family and then leaving home. And the last storyline, number 7, one of the more important storylines in these 50 chapters, is the storyline of Joseph. And we find that Joseph is in Egypt. He has been sold by his brothers, and he finds himself in Egypt and works himself up into the Pharaoh's household, gets a prominent position, and eventually is responsible for bringing in his family and having the nation of Israel populate in Egypt, which is where a conflict comes when Pharaoh determines there's just too many Israelites there and he needs to contain them. And soon in Exodus we're going to meet brother Moses. So these are the 7 important storylines in this book. The storyline of creation, the storyline of Adam, the storyline of Noah, the storyline of Abraham, the storyline of Isaac, his son, the storyline of Jacob, and the storyline of Joseph. I hope that you continue to go through this study and help yourself connect to what's been important in our travels and our journey, and I hope that it blesses you. Stay tuned. We'll be right back as we continue in the next segment of Genesis. Hi, I'm Dr. Christie Solomon, and this is Christian Concepts. We've been studying through the book of Genesis, and I want us to continue in this segment where we are going to learn about at least 7 major themes that are also found in the book of Genesis. I know that you are an astute student and you are going through your study, learning some great aspects that you may have already known and want to continue. So right now, I want to give you 7 major themes that are also found in our devotional study in the book of Genesis. So write these down as we briefly cover them. The first theme here that we want to introduce to you is the theme, of course, of beginnings. We know that Genesis means beginnings, and the theme of beginnings is already instituted and started and carried through all 50 chapters because, of course, we learn about the first people, the universe, the first sin, and on and on and on. The second theme that we are going to cover is the theme of disobedience. We learn about that, of course, through the first killing and then the disobedience of the people who are part of the storylines in Genesis. The third theme is the theme of sin. Unfortunately, we have learned about sin in the beginning of time as it continues to today. Theme number 4 that we find in the book of Genesis is the promises of God. He has given promises to the people of Israel, and he continues to give us promises today. Theme number 5 is obedience. Well, if we've covered disobedience, then of course the chapters included in Genesis, all 50 chapters, also share how the people were obedient and how God blessed them. Theme number 6 is the theme of prosperity. Some of you may believe that God does not want you to be prosperous. That is an untruth. Starting in Genesis, God shows how he prospered the people of Israel through Abraham, through Noah, through Moses, and on. So prosperity is not just considered money, but is also included in impact and influence and position. And finally, my brothers and sisters, one of the last major themes that is covered in the book of Genesis is the theme of Israel and how Israel has an impact on the world. I want to share with you once again the 7 themes so that you can reflect in your study. There is the theme of beginnings, the theme of disobedience, the theme of the sin, the theme of promises, obedience, prosperity, and Israel. I hope that you have learned some things and are going to incorporate these aspects in your study as we continue in our broadcast and our devotion. I want you to continue to watch us, to continue to write to us on Christian Concepts, Post Office Box 3069, Southfield, Michigan 48037, or you can email us at Christian Concepts at yahoo.com. Of course, you can view us on Facebook or on YouTube. We're glad that you are tuning in to our broadcast weekly, and we thank you for your support. Hello to all of our supporters from all over the world, and we want God to immensely bless you. And until we meet again, have a blessed week. Have a understanding that God loves you and that your purpose here is to worship Him. To God be the glory. Have a great day.